Have you ever wondered how well you truly know the people living next door? What lies behind their friendly smiles and casual greetings? We cannot identify potentially dangerous individuals among our acquaintances. Hello, friends. Welcome to True Crime Records. Subscribe now to stay updated with the latest true crime stories. Today we will explore the details of Brian and Beverly murder case. Brian and Beverly Moe were a seemingly perfect couple whose life looked like a fairy tale. They were deeply in love, financially secure, and enjoyed traveling and spending time together. But everything changed when they moved into a new neighborhood. Not long after settling in, both Brian and Beverly were discovered dead in their home. Blood evidence at the scene led investigators straight to a nearby house. The motive behind this horrific act shocked even the most seasoned detectives. Brian and Beverly first met in the spring of 2001 at a mutual friends party. At the time, they were both college students. But from the moment they locked eyes, it was clear they had found something special. What started as mutual admiration quickly deepened into a powerful connection, and they became inseparable. That summer, the couple took turns visiting each other's families, introducing their partners to their parents, and openly sharing their serious intentions. Both families immediately approved of the relationship, noting how well the two complemented each other. Brian and Beverly had been lively and adventurous from a young age. Beverly was a talented athlete who excelled in baseball and played guitar with ease and had a passion for learning new languages. Her radiant smile could light up a room, and she was adored by her friends and peers. Alike, Brian had always been attracted to more dangerous and unconventional sports. He was passionate about rock climbing, surfing, and diving, and he loved taking risks. Every year, he tried to visit a new place and learn a new skill. When Brian and Beverly first saw and spoke to each other, they immediately realized they were on the same wavelength. This became the starting point for their intense and fulfilling relationship together. They climbed mountains, skied and snowboarded, went scuba diving, and conquered waves and peaks alike. Despite their whirlwind romance and seemingly perfect relationship, the couple wasn't in a rush to get married. They both wanted to finish their education first. Once they graduated, they focused on saving for a house. Brian began building a career at an industrial company, and Beverly got a job as a hotel administrator where her language skills were invaluable. On May 15, 2006, the couple officially tied the knot. They held a beautiful ceremony by the ocean, inviting only their closest family and friends. Afterward, they went on a long honeymoon, visiting several countries. When they returned, Brian and Beverly purchased a spacious home in the quiet town of Graham in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. The house was located in a scenic and sparsely populated area near a forest and a river. It was a perfect place to start their family and enjoy a peaceful life. Brian worked as an engineer at a branch of a large industrial company, while Beverly focused on translation work and decided to pursue a second degree. The couple quickly got to know their neighbors and made friends in their new town. Unfortunately, their happy and carefree life didn't last long. On Saturday, November 17, 2007, at around 8 a.m., Brian's friend Stephen arrived at the couple's house. The two had planned to go fishing that morning. Stephen knocked on the door, but got no response, thinking that Brian had probably overslept. Stephen knocked louder and waited, but the house was silent. Stephen decided to wait in his car for about 30 minutes, trying to call Brian repeatedly. However, his calls went unanswered. Frustrated and feeling a bit upset that his friend might have changed plans without telling him, Stephen eventually left to fish on his own, since he had all the necessary gear with him. Later that day, still unable to reach Brian or Beverly, Stephen decided to return to their house. Once again, there was no answer at the door. This time, Stephen decided to walk around the property and look through the windows. He was starting to feel uneasy. Brian was a responsible and punctual person who wouldn't just disappear without notifying anyone. When Stephen reached the garage, he looked through a small window and saw that the couple's car was parked inside. This made him even more anxious, but he tried to push away any bad thoughts, moving to the living room window. He attempted to see inside, and the house lights were off. It was hard to make anything out. What he could see, however, left him deeply alarmed. The TV was lying face down on the floor, and just beyond it, something large and unmoving was on the ground. Stephen rushed back to his car to grab his fishing flashlight, switched it on, and directed the beam into the living room. What he saw froze him. In terror, on the floor laid two bodies partially covered with a blanket that was soaked through with blood. One bare foot stuck out from one side, and a hand was visible on the other. Horrified, Stephen immediately called emergency services to report what he had seen. He waited for law enforcement to arrive, staying by the house of his friends when officers arrived. Stephen was the first to be interviewed. He recounted everything. He knew about the day and expressed deep regret that he hadn't checked the windows earlier that morning when neither Brian nor Beverly answered his knocks or calls. Examining the crime scene, the front door wasn't locked, nor was it forced open. Both had been dead for at least 12 hours, based on initial observations. The cause of death was determined to be gunshot wounds inflicted by a large-caliber weapon. Each victim had been shot 3 times, leaving no chance of survival. Personal belongings, cell phones, and even cash were untouched. Ruling out robbery as a motive, there were no signs of struggle, and apart from the gunshot wounds, the bodies showed no evidence of other injuries or aggression. However, according to witnesses, the couple had no known enemies or unresolved conflicts. The bodies had been moved after the crime, as evidenced by drag marks smeared with blood across the floor. The perpetrator had clumsily attempted to clean up, leaving smeared blood trails and splatters on the walls and furniture indicating where the victims had been during the attack. 6 spent shell casings were found at the scene. Surprisingly, the ASIN hadn't bothered to collect them. Forensics later confirmed the shots had been fired from a .22 caliber revolver. Investigators concluded that both victims were shot with the same weapon, and likely by a single perpetrator. The unbroken lock suggested that the couple had willingly let the visitor inside. Detectives theorized that Brian might have answered a knock at the door, recognized the visitor, and let them in. Perhaps he invited the person into the house and turned toward the living room, but as soon as he did, the ASIN pulled out a firearm and fired 3 shots at close range into Brian's back. One bullet exited his body and struck the television screen, causing it to topple over onto the floor. The noise likely drew Beverly out of the bedroom when she saw her husband lying in a pool of blood, and the assailant standing nearby. She tried to run tragically. She didn't make it far before 3 shots struck her in the back, killing her in the hallway. Her body was later dragged into the living room and placed beside Brian's. Investigators found a shoe print on the blanket. The shoe pattern was sent to a lab where forensic specialists identified that the prints were of a rare model of heavy-duty work boots. Detectives conducted extensive interviews in hope of finding witnesses. When they reached the door of Daniel and Jennifer, who lived in the nearby home, they finally got a promising lead. Daniel showed a suspicious behavior and told a fabricated story about a truck which he saw in front of Brian's home that morning, but he changed the story many times. This thing prompted detectives to take a closer look at Daniel. They found out that Daniel had a troubled past. At 18, he was arrested for robbery for the first time. After this, Daniel continued to have frequent run-ins with the law. Over the years, each time he received minimal sentences for his crimes. His mental health was not stable, and he used to consume alcohol, which led him to aggressive and dangerous outbursts. In July 1991, during an argument with his mother, Daniel suddenly grabbed a knife and attacked her. She died at the spot. Police arrested him, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Despite this sentence, Daniel was released on parole in 2006. Then Daniel married Jennifer and moved into her home in a small town of Graham. Daniel also worked at a construction company for a short period of time. With this track record, Daniel was the perfect suspect when detectives completed their investigation and found overwhelming evidences against him. Daniel had no choice but to confess and cooperate with investigators. He explained that on the night before the crime, he had spent hours at a bar, drinking and using strong substances when he ran out of money to pay his tab. The bar staff threw him out, threatening to call the police. In a fit of rage, Daniel suddenly recalled that he had given his neighbor Brian Moe a tattoo the previous month as a friendly gesture. However, Daniel decided that he was owed payment for his work, and arbitrarily demanded $50 for the service. Armed with his revolver, he showed up at the Moe's house at 5 a.m., while the couple was still asleep, Brian annoyed by the early visit. Brian refused, telling Daniel to come back after he'd sobered up, but Daniel was insistent to defuse the situation. Brian decided it was easier to pay and headed to another room to retrieve the money. As he walked away, He made a remark that Daniel found offensive. This triggered Daniel's fury in a split-second decision. He drew his gun and fired 3 shots into Brian's back. The sound of gunfire woke Beverly, who came out to investigate. She saw her husband lying on the floor in a pool of blood, and Daniel standing over him with a gun. Realizing the danger, she tried to run back to the bedroom but was shot 3 times in the back before she could escape. After realizing the gravity of what he had done, Daniel went home and enlisted his wife Jennifer to help clean up the crime scene. Disturbingly, Jennifer didn't seem surprised by his actions together. They moved Beverly's body into the living room, placing it beside Brian, and covered both with a blanket. It was Jennifer who suggested using a broom to erase the bloody footprints. She also meticulously wiped down surfaces to remove fingerprints, though she missed one crucial handprint. Once the cleaning was done, Daniel disposed of the murder weapon by throwing it into a nearby river. Despite extensive efforts by investigators, the revolver was never recovered. Daniel Tabaris was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.